Chammah here. I'm originally from Zambia. Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, for the leadership from Hanyang University, for just giving me this opportunity to talk about things that are going on in Zambia more particularly, and generally in Africa. Today, much more specifically, I want to talk about 2021 general election as a critical or as a critique of the idea of a Christian nation as a theopolitical problem in Zambia. I want to get back to that so that you get to know exactly what I want to talk about today. I'm talking about 2021 general election as a critique of the idea of a Christian nation, which I'll be explaining just in a few minutes, as a theopolitical problem in Zambia. I will be arguing for basically two things. And the first one, I'll be arguing that the voters in 2021 general election unsettled, disrupted, and subverted religious politics enshrined in the idea of a Christian nation as an ideological state apparatus of power. Second, I will demonstrate that for many Zambians, 2021 general election was an outcry for a life-giving political ethic underpinned on the option for the fullness of life. And finally, I'll conclude by stressing that authentic democracy in Zambia or in Africa in general can no longer be located in either religious politics or secular democracy, but rather in the post-colonial continuous struggle for a new society where all human beings, and indeed all creation, have a place overflowing with justice and an equitable society that affirms the values and dignity of everyone as God's creation. Before I go deep into this discussion, let me take you in the worldview that is functional in Zambia today. Zambia is a context entrenched in a religious worldview, especially Christianity. This worldview forms the background against which everyday life processes take place for many Zambians. So therefore, for many Zambians, Christianity has become an indigenous, we can even describe it as a traditional religious bedrock of normal way of looking at and doing things. What essentially that means is that many Zambians cannot distinguish between what is Christianity and what is secular. The Christianity has become one and the same thing as secular in that way of thinking. So Christianity has largely devolved to subconscious and habitual practice or deep-rooted conceptions of reality, and is now a framework through which knowledge about life itself and meaning of life are constructed, and attitudes and mentalities towards everyday life are constantly shaped and reshaped, negotiated and renegotiated in Zambia today. So Zambia is a nation with an estimated number of Christians at 98% of the total population. 98% of Zambians ascribe to Christianity. That's essentially what it means. But in addition to that, there is a brand of Christianity which is called Pentecostal charismatics, which these are churches with a very strong conservative, sometimes people say fundamentalist, religious worldview of life. And this population of Christians now comprises of an estimated of 25% of the overall population of a country. So that means there is a lot of contestation when it comes to understanding Christianity in Zambia. Let me quote Henry Giroux about culture, because what he captures here in his definition of culture is essentially what Christianity has become in Zambia. Christianity in Zambia, and I quote Geru, is constituted as a dialectical instance of power and conflict, rooted in the struggle over both material conditions and the form and content of practical activity. End of quote. So let me take you a little bit back on this quotation, because if you can understand this quotation, then you understand how Christianity is functioning in Zambia today. So Christianity in Zambia, I quote again Geru, is constituted as a dialectical instance of power and conflict, rooted in the struggle over both material conditions and the form and the content of practical activity. End of quote. What essentially that means is that Christianity is not only the lived experiences of Zambians, but also the practical activity embedded in the ownership, control, power, and maintenance of institutions and resources that constitute the nature and meaning of Christianity. That's basically in Zambia. So scholars have noted that since the declaration of Zambia as a Christian nation, that was in 1991 by Frederick Chiluba, who was the second Republican president in Zambia, Christianity has become a factor in Zambian politics and the normative framework through which politics, even social life and public life, are navigated and negotiated today. Zambia is the only, that is according to my knowledge at least, Zambia is the only country in the world which has openly declared and defined itself as a Christian nation by constitution. And people affectionately call this declaration, this Christian nation, as a declaration. By constitution, Zambia is a Christian nation. The nation was declared a Christian nation by Frederick Chiluba, as I've already said, who was a Pentecostal Christian himself upon his inauguration as the second Republican president of Zambia in 1991. He stood and declared Zambia a Christian nation. So the Constitution of Zambia from 1996, and currently it was amended in 2016, states this, and I quote, "We, the people of Zambia, acknowledge the supremacy of God Almighty, declare the Republic a Christian nation while upholding a person's right to the region, to freedom of the region, conscience, and belief." End of quote. I quote again, "We, the people of Zambia, acknowledge the supremacy of God Almighty, declare the Republic a Christian nation while upholding a person's right to freedom of conscience, belief, or the region." End of quote. So this so-called declaration, which was grounded in Pentecostal conservative religious beliefs and practices, has become one of the most intricate theopolitical problems that defines and in many ways determines the religio-political atmosphere, the public consciousness, and the political cultural imaginations of a large sector of Zambian people, from top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top. It is essentially a normative, a way of life in Zambia. Chiluba, whom I've quoted above, sought to utilize the declaration as a prophetic tool for transforming the political ideals and public culture by creating what he described as a Christian political consciousness that can transcend human sinfulness. Chiluba believed that the problems that the nation was facing was as a result of human sin. And for him to try and overcome that sinfulness, it declared Zambia a Christian nation as a way of overcoming and combating human sinfulness. So the Ministry of National Guidance and Religious Affairs defined a Christian nation as follows. A Christian nation is a nation that acknowledges the divine lordship of Jesus Christ over all its affairs. And I want you to underline all, because it's not just some affairs of the nation, but all affairs of the nation. The Holy Bible continues, guides the values and beliefs that its people espouse in family life and apply appropriately in government and all sectors of society for enhanced welfare, peace, and unity. God's principles of righteousness and justice are the foundation for the rule of law and governance for sustainable social order and morality. End of quote. So if you look at some of the key underpinnings of a Christian nation according to Zambian understanding of it, is first of all, the divine lordship of Jesus Christ over all affairs of human life. Second, it is based on the principles of the Bible and its values that should, in fact, transform or engage the public consciousness for transformation towards welfare, peace, and unity. So two critical aspects, the Lordship of Jesus Christ and the Bible, are the key for understanding Zambia as a Christian nation. Hence, the declaration constitutes what I am calling here a theopolitical problem and a phenomenon that must be engaged even before interrogating the religious characteristics or features of Zambian people themselves. The declaration is in essence the first thing that any scholar or any political scientist must engage before even trying to understand how Christianity works in Zambian context. So the declaration is first and foremost a question of a region, or a question of the religious and political total system. And citizens experience this monotheistic or singularity or singular ideological system as primacy, totalizing, monopolizing, ultimate, imposing, and perversive frame of understanding and articulating Zambia as a Christian nation embedded in a unified meaning. So the Christian nation essentially seeks to impose a unified meaning of life, a unified understanding of Zambia, a unified future based on the two principles that I've already mentioned, the Lordship of Jesus Christ and the Bible, two critical aspects, as it were. So what we are dealing with here is, it could be characterized as an institutionalization and nationalization of the dominance of the God that is one, as one and the only truth and acceptable way of thinking and doing politics in Zambia. Institutionalization of the dominance of the God that is one, as one and the only truth, an acceptable way of thinking and doing politics in Zambia. In this view of the God that is one, it means all other ways of thinking are essentially excluded. The Islamic way of thinking is excluded. Non-religious way of thinking is excluded. All other religions that are not Christian in their thinking are all excluded. There is only one way of thinking about politics in Zambia, and that is through Christian framework. That's what the declaration tried to communicate to the Zambian people. So this view is legitimated mostly by Pentecostal charismatics And unfortunately, it's manipulated by politicians. Politicians find the declaration, most of them, not all of them, as a tool that can be manipulated for them to stay in power. So for the past 3 decades since the declaration itself has become the normative foundation, so deeply entrenched that it always appears as a sanctioning foundation or substratum in the processes of meaning making in various spheres of life, such as family, sexualities, development, economic, cultural, and political governance. It is always an ever-present reality that people have to contend with, try to manage, try to navigate, and try to make sense of as they do all other various activities in life. For example, in the 7th National Development Plan of the Ministry of National Development Planning, this is what they said will be the foundation of development. Zambia, being declared a Christian nation, will ensure that the development agenda of the nation promotes Christian values and principles at every level of society and governance. End of the quote. At every level of society and governance. Almost there is a belief that there can be no development without engaging the Christian values or the declaration in the country. So the 6th president of Zambia, Edgar Changwa Lungu, the one who was a president from 2015 to August 2021, did everything conceivable, everything possible to reproduce and perpetuate Christian nationalist ideology for him to maintain his power as ordained by God. And I'm deliberately using the last phrase here, ordained by God, because this is the way he saw himself, and this is the way people perceived him, as ordained by God to be the president of Zambia. So in the context of Zambia, the opposition party leader, Hakainde Hichilema, the current president of Zambia since 24th August 2021, was described as Satanist by some Christians, because in some ways he did not clearly engage the declaration. They didn't understand his position about the declaration. And just because they didn't understand, they perceived him as a Satanist. So in that thinking, as a Satanist, as an embodiment of darkness, Pentecostal charismatics believed they were to resist him through spiritual warfare and secure Edgar Lungu's president as a guardian of a declaration. So 2 things that you have to see that is coming here. Edgar Changwa Lungu was ordained by God, according to their thinking, because they perceived him as a guardian of a declaration. He had a clear position about the declaration. He said, as the president of Zambia, he was going to protect the declaration. And that was enough for many Pentecostals to fight for his presidency. On the other hand, Hakainde Hichilema didn't have a clear position about the declaration. And just that shit position about it actually resulted in declaring him as a Satanist, as an embodiment of darkness by many Zambians. Therefore, in 2015, some Pentecostals, in fact, went to the extent of forming a Christian campaign wing, which they called Christians for Lungu, vote for Lungu, because Lungu was ordained by God. Pentecostals, in essence, see themselves, and I quote here, see themselves as the messengers, or see their message, see the message of their religion as true for everybody, every single person, as a truth that everybody must embrace. In extension, therefore, they wish to change the political rules of play in order for these truths to be made those constitutive of a political. Let me quote this one so that you can capture it in a more right way. So the Pentecostals in Zambia see the message of their religion as true for everybody. In extension, therefore, they wish to change the political rules of play in order for those truths to be made constitutive of a political. They want their ideas of Christianity, their ideas of religion to be the foundation of the political in Zambia, to dictate how politics are done, to dictate how people engage politics as well. That's what they want. In many ways, therefore, this has made the declaration an hindrance to alternative thinking about the destiny and the future of Zambia, as many Pentecostals seek to ground political authority and national sovereignty in their literal interpretation of the Bible and redemptive miracles. Redemptive miracles is important here because the theory of miracles as a frame for conceiving economic progress has yet to yield any tangible results. Chiluba, when he declared Zambia as a Christian nation in 1991, he did so in the framework of miracles. Chiluba believed in the supernatural power to, and I quote, this is a quotation from what he said in 1991, to send healing, restoration, revival, blessing, and prosperity to Zambia. That's the way he believed, and end of quote. So Chiluba believed in a very simple understanding of this. A nation that fears the Lord prospers. That was a grounding of a declaration. However, despite the fact that miracle theory has not yielded any tangible results for economy in Zambia, most Pentecostals do not care about the failure of political economy of miracles at all. They don't. It's not so much a problem for them. Their main concern is for the country to uphold Christian values as enshrined in the Bible. And their fear is simple. Hakainde Hichilema, who is now the current president, wants to bring Satanism and secularism in Zambia. That's as simple as that. And even now, they still fear that he's become a president. He might as well do those things, in fact. So it is this religio-political view of life and worldview, which was and is still increasingly perceived by many young people and women as well, as holding the entire nation to ransom. The state has failed to take a non-religious view of politics, and the Pentecostalism has failed to mobilize critical prophetic theological resources for interacting with the state. They've taken these churches a very uncritical solidarity with the state. Furthermore, the declaration is regarded as something that should be protected by every succeeding government. Here lies, in fact, the main problem why Pentecostals cannot resist bad politics and even corruption in Zambia, because of the expectation that every new president will be the guardian of a declaration of Zambia as a Christian nation. It is essentially at the mercy, that is a declaration, it's at the mercy of every new government, and in turn forcing the Pentecostal communities to always take sides with every new government, every new president, simply for fear that if they oppose or resist bad policies and political corruption and oppression of Zambians, the declaration may be removed from the national constitution. That they can't live with. They can't live with. For many Pentecostals, therefore, it is better for the nation to be destroyed as a Christian nation through corruption and authoritarianism than to have a good president who would remove the declaration from the constitution. That president who dares to remove the declaration from the constitution is dangerous, is a Satanist. He must be rejected. He must be resisted. And that's what Pentecostals have been doing for the past 30 years, resisting any president who wishes to remove the declaration and declaring them Satanists. For them, removing the declaration from the Constitution is worse than corruption, is worse than dictatorship, is worse than anything that you can imagine, because all these things, just removing it from the declaration, heralds the death of the nation. They fear it will be the beginning of the death of Zambia. Therefore, it's better to live in a corrupt and caring and compassionate and dictator Christian nation than to live in a prosperous secular nation. It can be argued here that Zambian Pentecostalism is not a prophetic or political religion in the sense that people think of these words. Rather, a community of Christians that regard themselves as the guardian of a Christian nation. That's the key. They regard themselves as the guardian of a declaration. That's a community of Pentecostals, in essence. But I may just send a wrong picture to you, where you feel that there is only one way of thinking in Zambia, and there is no resistance at all about it. That's not, in fact, truth about Zambia. The structures, material practices, and lived relationships of Zambian people do not themselves comprise of a unified Christian political ideology, not at all. Rather, are characterized by a complex of dominant and secondary religious thought systems, including various dissent voices that are functional to Zambian society. There are many of them. There are many dissent voices within and without, that are engaging this idea of a declaration. Even among Pentecostals, there are Pentecostal scholars who are resisting this normative understanding of Christianity. Hence, while the declaration is a dominant religio-political ideology, it is constantly subverted and contested and resisted, especially by young people, by an emerging community of atheists. There is, in fact, an emerging community of atheists in Zambia, and quite a number of intellectuals within Zambia and outside Zambia. They are contesting, and they have contested the idea of a declaration. Yet the declaration formed the foundation for the Christian political ideology, which was one of the key political forces the voters in 2021 general election unsettled, disrupted, subverted as neo-colonial ideological state apparatus of power. It was a declaration that people had to subvert, that had to resist in this 2021 general election, because Lungu had made the declaration the principal foundation of his governance. And all the corruption that came, and all the dictatorship that Zambian people endured during Lungu's regime were actually grounded in the idea of the Christian nation. Voting, therefore, in Zambia in 2021, or even the previous election, has been perceived as apparatus of legitimatizing authoritarian leadership and democratic governments. For too long, for the past 30 years, it has been almost the same story, that when people go to vote, when the election comes, they are actually just sanctioning, legitimatizing these authoritarian leaders to look like they are democratic governments in the world, when in essence, they are dangerous. That has been one of the challenges of elections in Zambia. In fact, not just in Zambia, elections in many African countries do not translate in democratic governments, democratic societies, and democratization of nations. Rather, they are meant for political correctness in the world that claim democracy at the summit of human achievement. So just for for political correctness. They have to have these elections so that when they go in power, they can look back and argue that they won the election. But in essence, it's not about democracy. It's about self. The polling stations have been for too long sites of self-emptying. And I use that word deliberately, self-emptying, where the masses are emptied of their dignity, subjectivity, and agents, so that the powerful become more powerful and the rich become more richer. That has been essentially the problem of elections in Zambia in many ways. Not all Zambian presidents have actually done this, but many of them, in fact, have ended up doing the same thing to Zambians. So casting the vote is literally casting one's life and destiny. The idea of democratic elections does not guarantee and secure the masses from the culture of neo-colonial nepotism, from dictatorship. Many masses in Africa, they've gone to the polling stations, cast their ballot papers, but they've come back and oppressed for doing so, in essence. So they need for something to rethink the whole process of election. I think that became important in 2021 election in Zambia, because many Zambian, especially young people, began to realize that despite its uses as an instrument of domination, elections may as well contain emancipatory ideals that could, if engaged differently, serve as emancipatory function or for liberation. So the young people wanted, and women especially, to rethink how to engage in the process of election. How do we vote? So the 2021 general election in Zambia was held amidst quite a lot of challenges, a lot of problems, amidst the gloomy view on the economy and the country's direction. As 2021 Afrobarometer survey demonstrated, and I quote here, a majority of Zambians are pessimistic about the country's direction and dissatisfied with the way their democracy is working. There was just untold corruption, untold misery, as a country regressed into dictatorship that nobody saw coming, in fact. It was in this context of political dissatisfaction, the context of struggle, that many young people began to see the 2021 general election as a site of resistance. They wanted to resist dehumanization. They wanted to resist corruption. They wanted to resist dictatorship. They wanted to reclaim their humanity. They wanted to reclaim dignity. So the 2021 general election was not just like any other election that Zambia has had in the last 30 years. It was an election of resistance. Just to take you into the registered voters for this election, the certified voter register included just slightly over 7 million voters, representing about 83% of the eligible voters population in Zambia. Zambia has about 19 million people. The majority of Zambians are young. It's a population below 16 years of age. That's what the population is about. So the eligible voters population is just slightly over 9 million of Zambians in this sense. So it's important to have that small background. Women constituted 53% of those who registered to vote, and men 46.6% of electorate in 2021 general election. This was further broken down as follows. The age group between 18 to 34 counted for the highest proportion at 54% of those who registered. So I want you to look at the key factors that are coming here. The women constituted the highest population of those who registered to vote, and the young people, the young generation, 18 to 34, the eligible voter for Zambia is 18 years. 18 to 34 years as the highest, 54%. And then the age range from 34 years to 50 years was at 28.9%. And the older age, that is from 50 years and above, was the lowest, was on 17.1% of those who registered. There was a turnout of 70.6% of the total number of those who registered, making the 2021 general election the highest since Zambia's multi-party election, that is, since 1991. And I want to emphasize, women and young people between eligible voter age of 18 years and 34 constituted the highest number of those who voted in 2021. They came in numbers. They turned the votes into weapons of resistance, and the polling stations and ballot papers into sites of struggle for change. That's the worldview that was functioning in Zambia this time. I want to quote something from BBC, what the reporter said about this election, and I quote, the young people or the young voters held the cards. With over half of the country's 7 million registered voters being under the age of 35, there are no extra points for guessing the significance of the role of young people in the outcome of the election. End of quote. They held the card. It was an historic election that saw the opposition leader, who was deemed by Pentecostals as Satanist, Hakainde Hichilema, capturing more than 2.8 million votes and seating the God-ordained leader of Zambia, Edgar Lungu, who got 1.8 million votes. He was unseated. With his ideology of Christianity, young people and women resisted that worldview because they saw what it was. It was never about, in fact, what was claimed to be religious at all. So for many women and young people, voting was personal. As a young woman who is just 25 years argues, young people voted in huge numbers. It was very personal to them. They went to ensure the mistakes of their parents were corrected. They voted for a leader based on better policies and ideas that can strengthen our state institutions. End of the quote. I want to make another quotation from another young woman who stressed, I am not voting for anyone in this election. I am voting for my job. I can't go 4 years without a job. I am voting for my job. It's as feminists say, the personal is political. Here, the voting became political itself in that sense. A reporter affirms, and I quote, it was, however, not just a problem. In fact, the problem he mentioned, the political repression and corruption, it was not just the problems, but rather the determination to take action to bring about democratic solution to this problem that led to historic youth-led vote in Zambia. Determination to bring down the system that had held everybody to ransom. Therefore, the 2021 general election shows that women and young people are the hope of democracy in Zambia and are critical in the process of reimagining and reshaping the contours of Zambian politics. That's what I believe. It is not in the politicians. It is not in the politicians who are. It is not the politicians who are the custodians of democracy, because authentic democracy is embodied in those who struggle for justice, those who struggle for equality, and those who struggle for authentic dignity for every human being and all creation. I keep on emphasizing all creation or the all ecological system, because democracy is increasingly moving to embrace the whole reality of things in the world today. That's where we are moving. So economic and political dissatisfactions redefine the 2021 general election into a locus of struggle for an alternative future for Zambia. I want to quote a bishop from one of his Pentecostal churches, Bishop Joy Makando, who has the largest single congregation in Zambia of over 12,000 members. He exhorted his members, who are the majority women and young people, just a few weeks before election. And this is what he said in his sermon. I quote, "As a citizen, go and vote. Your vote is your weapon. If you don't vote, that may be the very vote that will make a difference. It's about the destiny of Zambia." End of quote. I just like the last part. It's about the destiny of Zambia. It was a struggle against institutionalization of corruption. Corruption had become a culture in Zambia. It was a struggle against politicization of a region, because Christian nation forms the foundation of politics in Zambia. It was a struggle against institutionalization of dehumanization, exploitation, and oppression that forced the young people and women to rethink elections and the meaning of voting. Rethinking it. Instead of voting because it is a national duty, an expectation, an imperative for being a good citizen, the women and young people redefined the idea of voting in emancipatory, liberatory terms as a recovering of human being as subject of Zambia. They redefined it. There was a general grievance against dehumanizing poverty that Lungu had brought. Most of the language that was heard in the street was the language of Twanaka. Irrevocable indignation. That word Twanaka is irrevocable indignation. It's a rage and resentment to do something about it. Twanaka defined the young people's perception and attitude towards Lungu and his Christianity. They wanted to do something about it. They became Twanaka. It's over. We've got to do something about the situation. And they did. Because Lungu was regarded now by young people and women as Judas Iscariot, who had not only betrayed the freedom and independence that was achieved through bloodshed, but also sold the nation to corrupt foreign investors who have no regard for Zambian people at all. It was an election of enough is enough. Lungu became everything the young people despised about neo-colonial politics in Zambia, in Africa rather. The epitome of corruption and failed nation. The embodiment of religious oppression. The polling stations were reconceptualized as sites of struggle for regaining human subjectivity by resisting being reduced to mere objects of voting, voting only for somebody to have a job and then in turn begin to oppress those who voted them in power. The voters were filled with inexplicable ethical indignation and intense disgust for Lungu with this Christian political ideology embedded in the Christian nation. So despite the military on the streets, which Lungu deployed on the election day, in the move that was perceived as seeking to undermine the electoral process to ensure voter turnout was low, the young people and women braved everything to go and vote. They went to the polling stations despite the fear of being killed, because being killed was better than living in a nation of dictators, the nation that was dehumanizing them. They were ready to die at the polling stations. The act of voting was an act of resistance against dehumanization, exploitation, and the forced religious politics that increasingly underpinned Lungu's political ideology. They perceived the Christian nation as an idolatry, as an ideology of death. The voters challenged Lungu's Christian ideology by publicly rejecting political passivity, docility, taking a stance of non-cooperation with gang violence that was happening in Zambia. There was a lot of violence in Zambia that Lungu somehow sanctioned. So the voters, they resisted violence and subverted religious political fundamentalism as false religion, as idolatry that works against national search for the fullness of life. It was a resistance. The voters redefined elections beyond the simply epistemological option for citizens to performative and practical epistemological option for themselves. It was about themselves. It was about regaining their humanity. That's what the election was about. But I'm coming to the conclusion. I want to just make a few comments here. That the 2021 voting was not about changing leadership. It was an anti-colonial transgression, a reclamation of democracy, an emancipatory therapeutic resistance, and an enactment of hope, a reaching out with every strength into an alternative future for Zambia. That was the election. In the context of this resistance, the region was invited to search for its true value and meaning for Zambia in joining Zambian people's struggle for full liberation and emancipation from cultures and politics of death. That's what he was invited. I want to quote the United States President Joe Biden's remark at the UN, the United Nations General Assembly. And this is what he said about Zambia and the young people. And I quote, "The authoritarians of the world may seek to claim the end of the age of democracy, but they are wrong. The truth is, the democratic world is everywhere. It lives in the young people of Zambia who harnessed the power of their vote for the first time, turning out in record numbers to denounce corruption and chart a new path for their country." End of quote. And he added, and I quote, "Democracy lives in peaceful protesters, human rights advocates, journalists, women fighting for freedom, among others, in countries like Zambia. End of quote. And here is my conclusion. I believe that for religion and politics in the context of Zambia, there is a need to construct a critical political theology of prophetic democracy. Need to rethink democracy in terms of prophetic imagination, in terms of rethinking it towards a different future for Zambia. Prophetic democracy and prophetic democratization, where the church takes a critical resistance, critical distance from the government, so that it can speak life into the systems of the state. This can help strengthen everyday ethics of resistance and social actions of life emerging from women who are struggling for justice, for equality, for young people who are struggling with employment, for human rights movements and activists, all of them who are struggling for the dignity of people. And these spaces, according to my understanding, should be harnessed to fortify civil societies and foreground social struggle for the emancipation and transformation of how politics can be done in Zambia. The church cannot be pushed out of politics, but the church can define its place in politics in terms of making life better for every Zambian, focusing much more on issues of common good, issues that are affecting Zambians in ways that the church can stand without any ambiguity that it is standing for the better Zambia and is going to struggle for people to regain their humanity in a full sense of word. Then politics will become meaningful for women and for young people struggling for the fullness of life. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.